Mark here from Smart ASMR, and today I'm going to be doing my Week 14 NFL recap video and my Week 15 NFL picks. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoy the video. The first game I'll be talking about is the Thursday night game between the New England Patriots and the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams ended up having a stellar defensive performance, and they defeated the Patriots 24-3. The Patriots are now 6-7 on the season, and the Rams are now 9-4. This game was kind of seen as the revenge game from the Super Bowl 53 13-3 loss the Rams experienced against the Patriots. The roster, especially for the Patriots, is completely different, but the Rams, I'm sure, were thinking about that in the back of their heads all night. In this game, the Rams are up 17-3 at halftime, and they scored one more touchdown in the third quarter off a 2-yard touchdown catch by Cooper Kupp, and that made the score 24-3, which ended up being the final score of the game. For the Patriots stats, Cam Newton went 9 of 16 for 119 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. Damian Harris had 11 carries for 50 yards. And N'Keal Harry had 3 catches for 49 yards. Damiere Byrd had 5 catches for 48 yards. Jacoby Myers had 4 catches for 47 yards. And for the Patriots defense, Byron Coward had a sack, and Miles Bryant had an interception. For the Rams stats, Jared Goff went 16 of 25 for 137 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and he had 4 carries for 11 yards and a touchdown. Cam Akers had 29 carries for 171 yards and 2 catches for 23 yards, so his productivity has been looking really great as of late for the rookie. Tyler Higbee had 2 catches for 34 yards. Cooper Kupp had 5 catches for 33 yards and a touchdown. And for the Rams defense, who really showed up today, Michael Brockers had 2 sacks. Aaron Donald had 1.5 sacks. Morgan Fox had a sack. And Leonard Floyd had a half sack. Kenny Young had a sack and a 79-yard pick six at the beginning of the second quarter. That play really set the tone for the rest of the game, as the Patriots were driving down the field and were at the Rams' 21-yard line. The next game we'll be talking about is the Tennessee Titans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Titans ended up routing the Jaguars 31-10. The Titans are now 9-4 on this season, and the Jaguars fall to 1-12. In this game, the first score was off a flea flicker, which went for 37 yards for a score. Ryan Tannehill ended up throwing a beautiful pass to A.J. Brown, which he snagged in the air one-handed in the right side of the end zone. That was a really thrilling play to watch. Then by halftime, the score was 17-3. And then the Titans really took control of the game in the third quarter. The score was 31-3 midway through the third quarter. The Jags eventually scored on a 5-yard touchdown catch by Keelan Cole near the end of the third quarter, which made the score 31-10, which has stayed for the rest of the game. For the Titans stats, Ryan Tannehill went 19 of 24 for 212 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Derrick Henry had 26 carries for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns, so he really balled out today. A.J. Brown had 7 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown. Jeff Swaim had 3 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown. And Malcolm Butler had an interception for the Titans defense. For the Jaguars stats, Mike Glennon went 13 of 23 for 85 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. He was eventually replaced by Gardner Minshew midway through the third quarter due to his poor performance. And Gardner Minshew brought a little life to the Jaguars in the end. He went 18 of 31 for 178 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. James Robinson had 12 carries for 67 yards. Keelan Cole had 7 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown. Laviska Shenault had 6 catches for 49 yards. And Joe Giles-Harris had a sack for the Jaguars defense. Up next, we'll be talking about the Minnesota Vikings at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers ended up defeating the Vikings 26-14. This is really good for the Buccaneers because now they're 8-5 and they're in prime position to making their first postseason appearance in 13 years. The Vikings fall to 6-7 and are currently out of the playoffs right now. They lost their spot to the Cardinals, and they have a big game against the Bears this Sunday. You know, if you lose that game, you're gonna have 8 losses, so it'd be really tough to make the playoffs at that point. In this game, the Vikings scored the first point on a 1-yard touchdown run by Dalvin Cook, which made it 6-0 because Dan Bailey ended up missing the extra point, and he also went 0 for 3 on his field goals. He missed from 36 yards out, 54 yards out, and 46 yards out. So that's 10 points right there that the Vikings ended up not getting due to those missed kicks. And they ended up losing by 12, so those are some pretty substantial points. Then after the 6-0 lead by the Vikings, the Buccaneers scored 2 touchdowns and a field goal to make the score 17-6 at halftime. And the Bucs never lost the lead in the second half. For the Vikings stats, Kirk Cousins went 24 of 37 for 225 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. He also had 5 carries for 41 yards. Dalvin Cook had 22 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown. This was a really solid performance against the number 1 rush defense in the NFL. Irv Smith Jr. had 4 catches for 63 yards and a touchdown. And Tyler Conklin had 5 catches for 40 yards. For the Buccaneers stats, Tom Brady went 15 of 23 for 196 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Ronald Jones had 18 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. Mike Evans had 3 catches for 56 yards. Antonio Brown had 5 catches for 49 yards. Scotty Miller had a 48-yard touchdown catch. And for the Bucs defense, they played really well. Shaquille Barrett had 2 sacks, and Dominican Sue had a sack. Jason Pierre-Paul had a sack. Pat O'Connor had a sack, and Antoine Winfield Jr. had a sack as well. Now we'll be talking about the Kansas City Chiefs at the Miami Dolphins. The Chiefs ended up defeating the Dolphins 33-27. The Chiefs are now 12-1 on the season, and they hold the first spot in the AFC playoff race. The Dolphins fall to 8-5, and they still hold the 7th playoff spot in the AFC playoff race right now. It's going to be a tight finish for the AFC. The Ravens are also 8-5 right now, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. In this game, the Dolphins got out to an early lead. They were up 10-0 early in the second quarter. Then the Chiefs are up 14-10 at half. themselves. They made the score 30-24 at the 4:15 mark left in the fourth quarter, but then Harrison Butker made a field goal for the Chiefs, and then the Dolphins kicked a field goal as well. So the comeback didn't happen, but it was impressive to see the Dolphins make the game within 6 after falling behind by 20. For the Chiefs stats, Patrick Mahomes went 24 of 34 for 393 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Usually Patrick Mahomes doesn't throw that many interceptions, so the Dolphins defense definitely came to play. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 16 carries for 32 yards and 5 catches for 59 yards. Travis Kelce had 8 catches for 136 yards and a touchdown. He's actually leading the league in receiving yards with 1,250, which is absolutely crazy to hear because he's a tight end. Tyreek Hill had 3 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown, and he also had a 32-yard touchdown run. So the Chiefs really got ahead of the Dolphins with their speedy players. They have a lot of speed on their offensive roster. Sammy Watkins had 2 catches for 52 yards. Nicole Hardman had 3 catches for 40 yards, and he also had a 67-yard punt return touchdown. For the Chiefs defense, Chris Jones, Mike Dana, Tershawn Wharton, and Frank Clark had sacks. And Chris Jones' sack resulted in a safety against the Dolphins. And Tyrann Mathieu had an interception. This is his 4th interception in his last 3 games. And he has 6 on the season now. He's 3rd in the league for interceptions this season. For the Dolphins stats, Tua Tagovailoa went 28 of 48 for 316 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He also had 6 carries for 24 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Washington had 13 carries for 35 yards. Lynn Bowden Jr. had 7 catches for 82 yards. Matt Collins had 5 catches for 66 yards. Mike Gesicki had 5 catches for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. And for the Dolphins defense, Jerome Baker had 2.5 sacks. Christian Wilkins had half a sack. Eric Rowe, Byron Jones, and Xavier Howard had interceptions. Xavier Howard's now leading the league with 9 interceptions after the pick he had against the Chiefs, which was a beautiful one-handed pick. Next game we'll be talking about is the Denver Broncos at the Carolina Panthers. The Broncos ended up defeating the Panthers 32-27. The Broncos are now 5-8 on the season, and the Panthers fall to 4-9. In this game, the Broncos were up 13-7 at half, and they held the lead for the rest of the game. For the Broncos stats, Drew Lock went 21 of 27 for 280 yards. He had 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, so he had a really good game. Melvin Gordon had 13 carries for 68 yards. KJ Hamler had 2 catches for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Troy Fumagalli had 4 catches for 53 yards. Tim Patrick had 3 catches for 36 yards and a touchdown. Nick Vannett had 4 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. For the Broncos defense, Will Parks, Jeremiah Adauchu, and DeMarcus Walker all had sacks. And Deontay Spencer had an 83-yard punt return touchdown in this game, which was the first touchdown of the game. For the Panther stats, Teddy Bridgewater went 30 of 40 for 283 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and he had 3 carries for 31 yards and a touchdown. Mike Davis had 11 carries for 51 yards and 2 touchdowns, and 5 catches for 42 yards. Robbie Anderson had 8 catches for 84 yards. Curtis Samuel had 7 catches for 68 yards. Farrell Cooper had 3 catches for 52 yards. And for the Panthers defense, Jeremy Chin had a sack. It resulted in a forced fumble against Drew Lock, and this is his first career sack. Up next, we'll be talking about the Houston Texans at the Chicago Bears. The Bears ended up dominating the Texans 36-7. The Texans fall to 4-9 on the season and are officially eliminated from the playoffs. And the Bears improved to 6-7 and snapped their 6-game losing streak. So their game against the Vikings, like I said, on Sunday will be a huge game for the potential to snag a playoff spot. In this game, the Bears are up 30-7 at half, and they rolled to a 36-7 victory. For the Texans stats, Deshaun Watson went 21 of 30 for 219 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions, and he had 7 carries for 38 yards. Greg Howell had 11 carries for 42 yards. Duke Johnson had 8 carries for 26 yards and 2 catches for 53 yards. Chad Hansen had 7 catches for 56 yards. Kiki Kuti had 3 catches for 24 yards and a touchdown. And for the Texans defense, Eric Murray had 2 sacks, and Tyrell Adams had a sack. For the Bears stats, Mitch Trubisky went 24 of 33 for 267 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So this was his best game this season. He's really at the point of his season where he needs to show that he can play well if he wants any slim chance of returning to the Bears next season, or to get a roster spot to compete for the starting job on another team next season. But at least for today, he was able to defeat Deshaun Watson head-to-head. Must have felt good for Trubisky to get the win and not have to hear the comparisons about the Bears not drafting Deshaun Watson and picking Trubisky as a bust. David Montgomery had 11 carries for 113 yards and a touchdown. He really set the tone of the game on his first carry, which was the Bears' first offensive play. He ran for an 80-yard touchdown. And he also had 3 catches for 42 yards. Allen Robinson continues to contribute for the Bears. He had 9 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown. He now has over 1,000 yards receiving on this season. Cole Kmet had 4 catches for 41 yards. Jimmy Graham had 4 catches for 23 yards and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney had 2 catches for 22 yards and a touchdown. And for the Bears defense, they were able to get 7 sacks on the day. Roquan Smith had 2 sacks. Mario Edwards had 2 sacks. Brent Urban, Bilal Nichols, and Khalil Mack each had a sack as well. And Khalil Mack had a fumble force and recovery, and he also registered a safety against the Texans as well. So he played really well. Next up, we'll be talking about the Arizona Cardinals at the New York Giants. The Cardinals ended up defeating the Giants 26-7. The Cardinals are now 7-6 on this season, and they're currently in the 7th playoff spot. So this game was huge for them. And the Giants fall to 5-8 on this season, and are currently in 2nd place in the NFC East, behind the Washington football team. In this game, the Cardinals are up 20-0 in the middle of the 3rd quarter, and they ended up rolling to victory. The Giants had 3 turnovers, and the Cardinals had none. So that was a huge difference in the game as well. For the Cardinal stats, Kyler Murray went 24 of 35 for 244 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. also had 13 carries for 47 yards. Kenyon Drake had 23 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins had 9 catches for 136 yards. This puts him at 1,155 yards on the season, which is the 5th most yards by a receiver so far this year. Dan Arnold had 2 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown. And for the Cardinals defense, Hassan Reddick had 5 sacks, which is an absolutely crazy number to think about in one game. He has the franchise record now for the Cardinals after that performance for one game. And he also had 3 fumble forces as well. Dennis Gardeck had 2 sacks, and Marcus Golden had 1 sack. And Cardinals kicker Mike Nugent went 4 for 4 on field goals with a long of 37 yards. For the Giants stats, Daniel Jones went 11 for 21 for 127 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. He was playing through a hamstring injury, which probably affected his mobility, so he wasn't at 100% for the game. Wayne Coleman had 12 carries for 57 yards. Dion Lewis had 2 carries for 14 yards and a touchdown. Golden Tate had 1 catch for 39 yards. Sterling Shepard had 3 catches for 35 yards. And Dalvin Tomlinson had a sack for the Giants. Now we'll be talking about the Dallas Cowboys at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cowboys ended up defeating the Bengals 30-7 in a dominant performance. The Cowboys are now 4-9 on the season, and the Bengals fall to 2-10-1. In this game, the Cowboys were up 17-7 at half, and they scored 13 unanswered points in the second half. In this game, the Bengals had 3 turnovers, and the Cowboys had 0. For the Cowboys stats, Andy Dalton went 16 of 23 for 185 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Ezekiel Elliott had 12 carries for 48 yards. Tony Pollard had 11 carries for 39 yards and 2 catches for 9 yards and a touchdown. Amari Cooper had 4 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb had 2 catches for 46 yards. For the Cowboys defense, Tyrone Crawford had 2 sacks, and Alton Smith had a 78-yard fumble return for a touchdown in the first quarter. This was a really big game-changing play, and the Cowboys defense really dominated in this game. And Greg Zerloin went 3 for 3 on his field goals with a long of 55 yards. For the Bengals stats, Brandon Allen went 27 of 36 for 217 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. Travion Williams had 12 carries for 49 yards. AJ Green had 6 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. He now has 65 touchdowns in his career for the Bengals, and that's 2 behind Chad Johnson's franchise record for the Bengals. So he's closing in on that record. T. Higgins had 5 catches for 49 yards. And for the Bengals defense, Marcus Hunt and Jordan Evans had 1 sack each. Up next, we'll be talking about the Indianapolis Colts at the Las Vegas Raiders. The Colts ended up defeating the Raiders 44-27. The Colts are now 9-4 on the season. They're currently in the 6th spot in the wild card race for the AFC playoffs, and the Raiders fall to 7-6, and they're currently looking outside of the playoffs. They're 2 spots out of the playoffs right now from that 7th wild card spot, so these next upcoming games are crucial for them if they want a chance to sneak in. In this game, the Colts were up 27-20 at the end of the third quarter, so the game was still within one score at that point. But then the Colts scored 17 points in the fourth, including a 50-yard pick six by Kari Willis. And then the Raiders ended up scoring a touchdown during the last minute of regulation off Derek Carr's 5-yard touchdown run. So that pick six really put the game away and gave the Colts the edge in the game in the fourth quarter. The Raiders had 3 turnovers in this game, and the Colts had none. So, if you're turning the ball over that much, then it's going to be hard for you to win these games. For the Colts stats, Phillip Rivers went 19 of 28 for 244 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor had 20 carries for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's really picking up his productivity, and it looks like the Colts are really starting to lean on him as the lead running back in their running back committee that they have right now. Nyheim Hines had 7 carries for 58 yards. T.Y. Hilton had 5 catches for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Phillip Rivers and T.Y. Hilton are really starting to find a rapport together and are showing more productivity. Jack Doyle had 3 catches for 44 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. had 2 catches for 42 yards. And for the Colts defense, Kari Willis and Kenny Moore had interceptions, including that 50-yard touchdown returned by Kari Willis, like I said before. Rodrigo Blankenship went 3 for 3 on his field goals, with a long of 35 yards. For the Raiders stats, Derek Carr went 31 of 45 for 316 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, and he had 3 carries for 12 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had 13 carries for 49 yards. Nelson Aguilar had 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. He's really starting to be a big receiver threat for the Raiders. Darren Waller had 7 catches for 75 yards. And Foster Moreau had a 47-yard touchdown catch. The next game we'll be talking about is the New York Jets at the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks ended up pummeling down on the Jets and won 40-3. The Jets are now 0-13, and the rest of their schedule is looking pretty tough with the Rams, Browns, and Patriots left. So it's going to be tough for them to squeeze out a win during these final 3 weeks. The Seahawks are now 9-4 on the season, and they're tied with the Rams for the NFC West lead. In this game, the Jets actually scored first on a 45-yard field goal by Sergio Castillo, but then Seattle scored those 40 unanswered points to dominate the game. For the Jets stats, Sam Darnold went 14 of 26 for 132 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Josh Adams had 6 carries for 27 yards. Braxton Berrios had 3 catches for 49 yards. And for the Jets defense, Lorenzo Fatukasi had a sack, and Marcus May had an interception. It was a one-handed interception. That was a beauty. Sergio Castillo only went 1 for 4 on field goals for the day, so not a good day for him. For the Seahawks stats, Russell Wilson went 21 of 27 for 206 yards. He had 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. Chris Carson had 12 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown, and 3 catches for 22 yards. Carlos Hyde had 15 carries for 66 yards. DK Metcalf had 6 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. Tyler Lockett had 5 catches for 52 yards. Will Dissly had 2 catches for 23 yards and a touchdown. Freddie Swain had 2 catches for 22 yards and a touchdown. David Moore had 3 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. So Russell Wilson threw to 4 different receivers for touchdowns. He was spreading the ball well in the game. For the Seahawks defense, Jamal Adams, Jerron Reed, and Shaquem Griffin had sacks. And Jamal Adams' sack in the game put him at 8.5 sacks, which is the most by a defensive back in NFL history. His sack was kind of anticlimactic, pushing Sam Darnold out of bounds, but it still counts as a sack, and it's still an amazing accomplishment. He still has 3 games to go, so he could really extend that record. The next game we'll be talking about is the Green Bay Packers at the Detroit Lions, an NFC North matchup. In this game, the Packers ended up defeating the Lions 31-24. The Packers are now 10-3 on the season, and they now currently hold the first round bye spot for the NFC playoff race. So they're the number 1 seed right now. They surpassed the Saints after the Saints loss, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The Lions fell to 5-8 on the season. In this game, the game was tied 14-14 at half. And then the Packers are up 28-14 in the fourth. And then it ended up being 28-21 with the Lions catching up. Then both teams traded field goals. And then after the Lions field goal, they tried an onside kick to try to get the ball back, and they failed on it. So that was the end of that game, and the Packers ended up sweeping the Lions this year. For the Packers stats, Aaron Rodgers went 26 of 33 for 290 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and he had 6 carries for 13 yards and a touchdown. So he's really putting up some good stats and is going neck to neck with Patrick Mahomes for that MVP race this year. Aaron Jones had 15 carries for 69 yards. Devontae Adams had 7 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had 6 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown. Robert Tonyan had 5 catches for 36 yards and a touchdown. And for the Packers defense, Darnell Savage, Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, and Rashawn Gary each had a sack. Also, Mason Crosby made a 57-yard field goal attempt in the game. For the Lions stats, Matthew Stafford went 24 of 34 for 244 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. He also left the game towards the end of the game with an injury, and it was said that he suffered a cartilage injury, so his status is in question for this week's game against the Titans, although there's a lot of doubt that he'll play this week. DeAndre Swift had 7 carries for 24 yards and a touchdown, and 4 catches for 26 yards. Kerryon Johnson had 2 carries for 3 yards and a touchdown. Danny Amendola had 6 catches for 66 yards. Marvin Jones Jr. had 4 catches for 48 yards. And TJ Hawkinson had 6 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown. Now we'll be talking about the Atlanta Falcons at the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers ended up defeating the Falcons 20-17. They ended up winning a close game this time, which they've been struggling to do for most of their season. The Falcons are now 4-9, and the Chargers are 4-9. The game was tied 17-17 until the last play of the game, where the Chargers won on a Michael Badgley 43-yard field goal. The Falcons had 3 turnovers in this game compared to the Chargers' 1 turnover, so that really helped their chances to win this game. For the Falcons stats, Matt Ryan went 21 of 32 for 224 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. Russell Gage went 1 for 1 on his passing play. It was a trick play where he threw a 39-yard touchdown. It ended up going to Calvin Ridley, so it was a really nice play to see. Russell Gage also had 5 catches for 82 yards. Ito Smith had 11 carries for 42 yards. Calvin Ridley had 8 catches for 124 yards and a touchdown. Laquan Treadwell had a 9-yard touchdown catch. Foyesade Oluokun had a sack, and Bleedy Ray Wilson had an interception. For the Chargers stats, Justin Herbert went 36 of 44 for 243 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Austin Eckler had 15 carries for 79 yards and 9 catches for 67 yards. So he really makes a big difference in the Chargers offense. Tyron Johnson had 6 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. Keenan Allen had 9 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. And for the Chargers defense, Justin Jones and Uchenna Nwosu had sacks, and Rayshawn Jenkins, Jaleel Adai, and Michael David had interceptions. Up next, we'll be talking about the Washington football team at the San Francisco 49ers. The Washington football team ended up beating the Niners 23-15. Washington's now 6-7 on the season and in sole possession of first place in the NFC East. And the Niners fall to 5-8 on the season. In this game, the Niners were up 7-0 at the end of the first quarter after a Jeff Wilson 1-yard touchdown run. But then Washington scored 23 points in the second and third quarters off 3 field goals and 2 big defensive plays. Both of these defensive plays ended up in touchdowns, which I'll talk about when I get to the stats. Then the Niners scored again, finally in the fourth quarter, from a 6-yard touchdown catch by Kyle Juszkiewicz. And then they got the 2-point conversion, and that's how the score ended up being how it was. For the Washington stats, Alex Smith went 8 of 19 for 57 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. He left the game early with a calf strain injury, unrelated to his leg injury from a couple of years ago. Dwayne Haskins took over for him and went 7 of 12 for 51 yards. He had 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I think Washington believes it's likely that Alex Smith will play in their upcoming game this week, though. J.D. McKissick had 11 carries for 68 yards. Logan Thomas had 6 catches for 43 yards. And for the Washington defense, they came up big in this game. Montez Sweat, Deron Payne, Kevin Pierre-Louis, and Chase Young all had sacks. Chase Young also had a 47-yard fumble return for a touchdown. And Cameron Curl had an interception, which he ended up returning 76 yards for the touchdown. So those were the two big defensive difference-maker plays, which really gave Washington the lead. Chase Young's 47-yard fumble return touchdown really changed the tide of the game. That was their first defensive touchdown of the game. And Dustin Hopkins went 3 for 4 on his field goals with a long of 51 yards. For the Niners stats, Nick Mullins went 25 for 45 for 260 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Raheem Mostert had 14 carries for 65 yards. Jeff Wilson had 11 carries for 31 yards and a touchdown. Brandon Ayuk had 10 catches for 119 yards. Kyle Juszczyk had 2 catches for 15 yards and a touchdown. And for the 49ers defense, Jordan Willis and Deion Jordan had sacks, and Jason Verrett had an interception. The next game I'll be talking about is the New Orleans Saints at the Philadelphia Eagles. This ended up being a big upset game. The Eagles ended up defeating the Saints 24-21. The Saints are now 10-3 and fall into the second position for the NFC playoff race. And the Eagles improved to 4-8-1. In this game, the Eagles are up 17-0 at half, off 2 touchdowns and a field goal, all in the second quarter, including an 82-yard run by Miles Sanders, which ended up in a touchdown. The rookie Jalen Hurts really sparked the offense today and brought some life into the Eagles, so that was cool to see. The Saints then made the game 14-17 at the end of the third quarter when they scored 2 touchdowns, and then both teams traded touchdowns in the fourth quarter. The Eagles never lost the lead all game during this, so they had a really solid win against a really good opponent. For the Saints stats, Taysom Hill went 28 of 38 for 291 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, and he had 5 carries for 33 yards. Alvin Kamara had 11 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown, and 7 catches for 44 yards. Michael Thomas had 8 catches for 84 yards. Tre'Quan Smith had 3 catches for 60 yards. Emmanuel Sanders had 3 catches for 48 yards and a touchdown. Jared Cook had 3 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown. And Will Lutz went 0 for 2 on his field goals. He missed a 45-yarder and a 57-yarder. It was said that he tweaked his non-kicking leg in the last game, so maybe that had something to do with his misses, because he's usually pretty clutch in games. So those field goals missed were a big difference in the game. That's 6 points that ended up not being put on the board. For the Eagles stats, Jalen Hurts went 17 of 30 for 167 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions, and he had 18 carries for 106 yards. So he's a pretty mobile quarterback, so that makes it hard to defend both the run and the pass when you gotta deal with an athletic quarterback like that. Miles Sanders had 14 carries for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jalen Reagor had 2 catches for 46 yards and 1 carry for 19 yards. Dallas Goedert had 4 catches for 43 yards. Alshon Jeffrey had a 15-yard touchdown catch. And And for the Eagles defense, Josh Sweat had 2 sacks, Javon Hargrove had 2 sacks, Fletcher Cox had 1 sack, and Duke Riley had an interception. And Jake Elliott went 1 for 2 on his field goals. He made a 44-yard field goal. Up next, we'll be talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Buffalo Bills. This was the Sunday night game. The Bills ended up defeating the Steelers 26-15. The Steelers are now 11-2 and have lost 2 straight now, after being undefeated at 11-0. The Bills are now 10-3 on this season. They're currently leading the AFC East. The Steelers were up 7-3 in the second quarter until Teron Johnson had a 51-yard pick six with under a minute left to play in the first half. So that really gave the Bills momentum going into halftime when it looked like they would have been down at least by 7-3. So they were happy to have the lead into half after all that. Then the Bills scored 2 touchdowns to make the game 23-7. Then once the score was that, the Steelers scored a touchdown and 2-point conversion. Then the Bills kicked a field goal after that in the fourth quarter to put the game out of reach. For the Steelers stats, Ben Roethlisberger went 21 of 37 for 187 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. James Conner had 10 carries for 18 yards, so their ground game really hasn't been showing much as of late. Juju Smith-Schuster had 6 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. Deontay Johnson had 4 catches for 40 yards. James Washington had 3 catches for 29 yards and a touchdown. Tyson Alualu had a sack and Mike Hilton had an interception. For the Bills stats, Josh Allen went 24 of 43 for 238 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He also had 6 carries for 28 yards. Zach Moss had 13 carries for 43 yards. Stephon Diggs had 10 catches for 130 yards and a touchdown. Cole Beasley had 5 catches for 41 yards. Gabriel Davis had 3 catches for 19 yards and a touchdown. He now has 6 touchdowns in the season. He's having a really good rookie season. And for the Bills defense, Matt Milano had a sack, and Teron Johnson and Levi Wallace had interceptions, which I said earlier, Teron Johnson's went 51 yards for a pick six. The final game I'll be talking about is the Monday night game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. This was definitely the game of the week, if not the game of the year, especially if you love offense. The Ravens ended up defeating the Browns 47-42. This was such a good game to watch. I was watching it on Monday night because I was off of work that day, and I was so entertained watching this game. The Ravens are now 8-5 and put themselves 1 spot out of the 7th spot in the wild card for the AFC. And the Browns fall to 9-4. In this game, the score was 35-34 Browns, with the 6:33 left in the fourth after a Baker Mayfield 5-yard touchdown run. Then Lamar returned on the field from the locker room he had left 2 series ago from cramping, but he came back in on 4th down after the Ravens' Trace McSorley got injured on a play, so they had no more quarterback options. So he came in on that 4th down and threw a touchdown, which was a 49-yard touchdown pass to Marquise Brown. And then the Browns ended up scoring less than a minute later. It was insane. On a 22-yard touchdown catch by Kareem Hunt. So that tied the game at 42-all. And then the Ravens ended up driving down the field, and they ended up making a 55-yard field goal by Justin Tucker with 2 seconds left. And then the Browns ended up going in desperation mode on their last offensive play and kept throwing laterals, and it ended up in the back of the end zone for a safety. So that's why the final score is 47-42. For the Ravens stats, Lamar Jackson went 11 of 17 for 163 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. He was really effective on the ground this game. He had 9 carries for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins had 13 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown. Gus Edwards had 7 carries for 49 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mark Andrews had 5 catches for 78 yards. Marquise Brown had 2 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. And Tyus Bowser had an interception. For the Browns stats, Baker Mayfield went 28 of 47 for 343 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, and he had 5 carries for 23 yards and a touchdown, so he played really well. Nick Chubb had 17 carries for 82 yards and 2 touchdowns, and 2 catches for 21 yards. And Kareem Hunt had 6 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown, and 6 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Donovan Peoples-Jones had 3 catches for 74 yards. He's continuing to have a really good rookie season, picking up for Odell Beckham Jr.'s place and all the injuries that they've been going through on offense. Rashard Higgins had 6 catches for 68 yards and a touchdown. Jarvis Landry had 6 catches for 52 yards. And for the Browns defense, Olivier Vernon had 2 sacks, and Sion Takitaki and Sheldon Richardson had 1 sack each. Alright, so now we'll be doing my Week 15 NFL picks. There's a lot of good games this week. Chargers at Raiders. I ended up picking the Raiders in this game. I posted that in the community tab before the game. And the Chargers ended up getting the upset win. I'll talk more about this game during my next video. But congrats to the Chargers in this game. I'm usually bad at picking the Thursday night games, it seems like. So whatever team I pick, it's your best bet to pick the opposite, and you'll most likely get the correct choice. Bills at Broncos. I'm gonna go with the Bills in this game. They've been playing really well, and I don't see any reason why they should lose this game. They've been on a roll lately. The Broncos are inconsistent. They have potential, but I think they need So it's going to make things harder for the ground game to get going for them. That's where the Packers are most susceptible. So I think the Packers will win pretty easily. Texans at Colts. I'm going with the Colts in this game. These two teams just played a couple of weeks ago and it was a really close game. But the Colts have looked good as of late. And the Texans just really fell apart, especially last game. So I'm going with the team that's looking more confident and has more to play for. The Texans really don't have much for receivers right now, so it's going to be tough for them to stay in this game, I think. Lions at Titans. I'm going with the Titans in this game. The Lions really don't have a lot to play for now. After losing to the Packers, it's going to be tough for them to snag a wild card spot in the playoffs. And Matthew Stafford's unlikely to play with a cartilage injury, so that makes things even worse for the Lions. I think the Titans will win pretty big in this game. Bears at Vikings. The first time these two teams played earlier in the season, Nick Foles was starting at quarterback, but now the offense looks like it's really starting to pick things up with Mitch Trubisky back in the starting lineup. It just depends on which Mitch Trubisky shows up. Hopefully the one without throwing turnovers. And if the Bears defense shows up, then I think they can get the win. I'm gonna pick the Bears in this game. This is kind of like a playoff game in a way, because whoever wins this game keeps themselves in contention for most likely the 7th wild card spot, which the Cardinals hold right now. Neither team's technically eliminated if they lose, but they're really going to have a hard chance to make it if they don't win this game. So this is a crucial game for both teams. And it seems kind of like a coin flip game though. Seahawks at Washington. This is kind of a tough game to pick because the Seahawks usually don't play well against good defenses, like we saw versus the Giants and that loss a couple of weeks ago. But I'm going to go with the Seahawks in this game. I'm just going to take a chance. It'll probably be a close game, but I just feel better choosing the Seahawks in this game. Patriots at Dolphins. I'm going with the Dolphins. The Patriots did not look good at all against the Rams because the Rams' defense was overwhelming, and the Dolphins have a really good defense, and I think they'll do the same thing to the Patriots and make Cam Newton uncomfortable in the pocket and force a lot of mistakes. So I think the Dolphins will get the victory. Jaguars at Ravens. I'm going with the Ravens in this game. The Ravens looked really good and got a lot of confidence and momentum by beating the Browns in that crazy Monday night game. So I think they'll continue to build off that and put themselves within striking distance of taking that 7th spot in the AFC playoffs. They need to stay solid if they want to be in the mix Falcons are such a hard team to figure out. Buccaneers are kind of hard to figure out too, but I think they'll get the job done. They've been in a position to take that 6th spot in the playoffs, and they need to keep getting wins if they want to secure that spot, so I think they'll get the win. 49ers at Cowboys. This is a pretty tough game to figure out, but I decided to pick the 49ers for this game. Seems like after the Cowboys win, they end up having a iffy game. Like, they can't really build off their wins. It's just tough for them with losing Dak Prescott for the season. The 49ers are decimated with injuries too, so it's really hard to tell which team's gonna end up with the victory, but I just decided to take a shot with the 49ers. Eagles at Cardinals. I'm gonna go with the Cardinals in this game. I think a lot of times when new players and new coaches are presented for a team, they end up playing really well in the first game and provide a spark. But I think it'll fizzle in the next game. The Cardinals really need this win, and I think they'll get the job done. Keep that 7th playoff spot in the NFC playoff race right now for at least another game. The Jets at the Rams. I don't think this is going to be the week the Jets get a win. I'm not sure if they'll even get a win for this season. Maybe in their Week 17 matchup versus the Patriots would be their best shot, since they played them close last time, but not against a really good defense like the Rams. I think the Rams will roll to victory in this one. Chiefs at Saints. These are both powerhouses in the NFC and AFC. It's kind of a tough matchup to pick, but with the Saints' iffy quarterback situation, with the Drew Brees injury, and Taysom Hill potentially starting, I'm going with the Chiefs in this game. They have too much talent, especially offensively. They got the speedsters, and I think they'll be able to put on a show and get by the Saints in this game. Browns at the Giants. I wish Odell Beckham Jr. was playing in this game, because then it could be a revenge game against his former team. But unfortunately, he's out with that ACL injury for the season. But I'm going with the Browns in this game because they had such a heartbreaking loss last week, and they played really well offensively. Their defense seems to have some issues, but an injured Daniel Jones, I don't think will do a huge amount of damage on them. So, I think the Browns will get the victory. And the last game is the Steelers at the Bengals. I'm going with the Steelers to get their win after losing 2 straight. The Bengals are too injured at the quarterback position and just got routed by the Cowboys, so